I always believe that if you make a promise, you got to keep it.
True.
And people need to know that you're reliable and that you work hard. So very basic things about working hard, making promises that you can keep, and then fulfilling them.
Small businesses were heavily affected during this pandemic, right? Of course, they got the support, but how exactly are you looking to build their confidence back? Federal elections in Canada are on 20th of September. Polling is already on. One person who has grown up in Montreal has served the riding of Ville-Marie, Sud-Ouest and Ile-des-Sœurs. At the federal level, he has served the nation as a Minister of Indigenous Communities. He's the first ever minister who has delivered speech in Mohawk language at the House of Commons. Just not that, he's a forceful advocate of increased federal investment on the special issues, if we talk about, of public transit, affordable housing and the Canada Child Benefit. Now, he's one person who's being loved by everyone in the riding. Just not that, at the national level as well, Canadians have appreciated his contribution and service for the Indigenous communities. Yes, I know you guessed it, I'm talking about Marc Miller. So today we got the opportunity to have a quick conversation with him to understand what kind of vision does he have for the next term. So let's welcome together in this conversation, Marc Miller. So thank you so much for your time, Marc, first of all, and I am absolutely happy to begin this conversation. First thing for sure, in the riding, people have this huge amount of love and respect for the kind of work that you have done. Not just on the camera, people know one person from the riding as you have represented for the 2 terms, a person who has worked more than just the conversations. So my first question today is that you have served the riding for 2 terms. So what has changed during this term and what's next?
Oh, thanks for having me on, and it's great to talk to your viewers about a riding or a part of Montreal that I love and that I'm representing now for the 3rd time. We know that Montreal, like any other sort of big city, has challenges about equality and in particular poverty levels in families.
True.
When we got into power, we had noticed this across Canada, and Montreal was no exception, and my riding was no exception, whether it's access to housing or people trying to not have enough money to make ends meet. So the child family benefit has been a game changer for families in my riding and across Canada. It's lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty and allowed people to make ends meet. We've consistently lifted that up and increased it over our term because we know what a difference it makes. It's dollars directly into the pockets of parents and families, and they know how to best use that money. So that's been a direct impact. A lot of people say the federal government's not close to them. We've made it a point as a party to go knock on doors and to go meet people, and with our policy actually be directly linked to their success. We also know that housing has been a challenge, and particularly these days and in this campaign, the spike in housing has been notable, and it has affected Montreal quite heavily. The federal government, and this is something we've been doing since 2015, was the first in a generation to invest in housing. We've been absent on the housing scene for jurisdictional reasons over the last generation.
Understand.
We didn't find that acceptable. We put money on the table for provinces, and in the height of COVID, we signed a deal with the Quebec government to invest many $billion into housing in Quebec. The biggest beneficiary will be where obviously the people live, which is Montreal. That isn't all. We've obviously during COVID, knowing that they're the homeless and those that need a shelter were most affected by the pandemic, we put $1 billion on the table, another $1 billion for budget 2021 to make sure we had rapid housing initiatives, to make sure that we had rapid builds and people could get a shelter over their head. This is something that is so important to people walking in the streets and walking downtown, because they know that people need an extra hand. We have a number of really, really interesting measures in our platform that are tested and are proven to work. Rent-to-own possibilities in the platform, which we're trying to move out. I would encourage everyone to take a look at that. Support for first-time homeowners that are looking at the shingle over their head and saying that's out of reach. And so I'm really excited about it. I'd encourage anyone that wants to dive into the details that are exciting to go and do that and look at our platform.
I guess like on your website as well, there's a lot of information that you and your team has shared, I guess. Right. So one thing, that we were, as you have already spoken about, like there were things that your team and even the entire team of Liberals have already achieved it. But like for the next term, like, everyone is saying, why is there election at this particular time? But like, what exactly is the vision that you or the entire team has for the next term? If we talk about the, first of all, let's talk about the riding and at the national level.
Yeah, and the first thing everyone has to realize is we need to finish the fight with COVID.
True.
You could be worried about the economy, and we can talk about some of the things we did to have people's backs during the economy, but we are not going to bounce back as long as everyone is not healthy and fully vaccinated.
True.
And so we got to finish this fight. And this is an election where people get to make a choice. People didn't have a choice as to how they would fight the pandemic in the last election because there was no COVID-19. It didn't exist yet. It surprised everyone, and we made sure that from day one we had people's backs, whether that was wage support for businesses that didn't have to lay people off, and we didn't have a financial catastrophe and insolvencies across Canada in the middle of the epidemic of the century, or support for workers that didn't have to take that difficult choice of going to work while sick and then spreading the disease. We saw what happened in long-term care facilities. We need to think about that because the people that built this country, a lot of them perished, thousands of them perished because of disastrous conditions in long-term care facilities. So that's some reflection we're going to have to think about as we move forward with investments in healthcare. So our platform relies heavily on our need to get out of this pandemic and to finish the fight. There are other parties that are willing to sacrifice health measures to pander to their base. I would encourage people to look at those parties and judge them quite severely when they cast their ballot. Our government has said time and time again, we have to continue to invest in housing. There are initiatives that I've mentioned earlier. Invest in mental health. It is a bit of the pandemic behind this pandemic, the impact on people's minds and well-being. It's not something we speak well as people about how we're feeling, but we know that it's there, it's looming, and we have to fight it. Investments in healthcare. In 2015, with a super hospital going up just up the mountain, and real possibilities of better healthcare in Quebec, people were still looking for a family doctor, and so that's still a challenge. And the federal government, we all know that these are provincial jurisdictions, and we have to work with the provinces, but we shouldn't use that as an excuse not to be there for provinces. So we said the provinces, while we've increased transfers during the pandemic, so the provinces could fight COVID, we need to be there again for them. And so this is about finishing the fight and making the investments to close certain gaps that we see.
Great. 7th of September, tourists from across the world, like people who are fully vaccinated, and there are certain terms which are clearly on canada.ca, they can actually enter the country, so this would help. So that brings me to the businesses. Small businesses were heavily affected during this pandemic, right? Of course, they got the support, but how exactly are you looking to build their confidence back? To get back to normal or to get them going from that point, if we talk about.
Yeah, and a number of tailored measures. I'd encourage everyone to look in the platform as to how we would support those businesses. We've said from day one, and building that confidence was key to keep people employed, whether it's rent support, whether it's support for their employees, that people could get a gainful wage. We know that we need to support those businesses in many ways, whether it's continued economic initiatives for innovation, or support in workforce labor training, and that is something that we have invested heavily with billions of dollars to make sure that people are well trained for an economy that's constantly evolving. And we'll see the direction that this will take after the pandemic. We know that a lot of people were ordering online, for example, and whether that goes back to retail, we don't know yet. So we'll be measuring that intensely and seeing how we can help as a federal government. There is a place for us, but it shouldn't be the entire space that we've occupied during the pandemic.
True. And that brings me to the point, like your work has been appreciated, especially the work that you have done for the Indigenous community at your role. So it's very important, of course, like, what do you see, like, the team Liberals would do further for in the same direction? Or let's put have a quick overview of what the things that you have achieved from that perspective.
Yeah, and it's an excellent question. When I became Minister of Indigenous Services 2 years ago, there was no epidemic.
True.
And if someone asked me what my number one priority was, and I said keep local health and safety, they would say, duh, that's obvious.
True.
And very unambitious. But that has become my number one priority, just because the vulnerability of Indigenous peoples to the epidemic, 3 to 5 times more. We have that with Center for Disease Control numbers in the US has confirmed that. And we know the impact that COVID has had and been devastating in a number of communities. What we said to Indigenous communities from day one is we will have your back, and by respecting you and the way you do things, you know better how to protect your people than we do. So we had to put resources, their availability, nurses, doctors, financial resources for communities that wanted to shut down and protect their own. We also had to deploy the military at times when communities got a lot of COVID and
True.
it just spread. That was in winter of last year.
True.
So that was an opportunity to build trust and confidence, but only with the partnership, and not with Ottawa deciding what to do all the time.
True.
Because those models have always failed. And so those reasons that Indigenous communities are vulnerable are the result of broad socioeconomic gaps and poor health outcomes that have come with those socioeconomic gaps. My number one job is to close them: health, education. All those gaps are still there, and they need to be closed with investments in water, infrastructure, healthcare, education. I have a large ministry that invests pretty much exclusively in that, as well as an emergency management function. So it's work that we need to be persistent and relentless, regardless of the government investing in communities, because we have a vision of our country that sometimes isn't shared by Indigenous peoples because they haven't been well served by it. My job is to serve Indigenous peoples and close those socioeconomic gaps. So if there is another outbreak, that the odds aren't stacked against people. And so far out of the pandemic, the mortality rate has been lower, and it's something to be quite proud of.
True.
But it doesn't mean that we've gotten rid of unacceptable things like overcrowded homes, no water. We've made progress despite a world pandemic, but there's work to do, and I really enjoyed my job, and I want to continue doing it.
Thank you. So now there is more of a personal question from being a Montrealer. Like, you know, the youngsters that I had a conversation as well, and have experienced myself as, like, you know, they definitely see that you are one person, like, you know, that they have closely watched, who, you know, work more and talk less. So being a Montrealer, one thing I just wanted to see, like, you know, from your personal perspective, what are the core values that genuinely, you know, that you have, you know, always inculcated, or you particularly consider? Because any action that you come across or any decision you have to take, what are the core values you always consider before taking a tough action or any kind of, you know, decision when you have to do the, you know, at any level? What are those core values that you personally refer to?
I always believe that if you make a promise, you got to keep it.
True.
And people need to know that you're reliable and that you work hard. So very basic things about working hard, making promises that you can keep, and then fulfilling them. And if you can't, being honest about why you didn't. The work that I do is based heavily in trust. I can't do the job that I do if people don't trust that I will fulfill my word, and if I can't, they have a reason for it. You have to think with your head. Sometimes you have to think with your heart as well. So it's basic things that will resonate with you. You got to be caring and loving and thoughtful, and foremost, really work hard at it. Every day counts, and you know, you need a bit of luck, but sometimes the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Luckier you get, yeah. So still, like, a lot of people, those who are planning, like, you know, those who are still in the deciding phase and about to go for the polling and cast their votes. What exactly are the few last words that you really want to say to all of them who are still voting, you know, waiting to make a decision about their votes? What would you like to say?
Well, I always ask them to, you know, no matter what their decision, to go out and vote. It is so important in the democracy such as Canada, and sometimes we take it for granted that you actually cast your vote. Think about what you're going to do. And obviously I want them to vote for me and for the Liberal Party, but it is more important that they go out and vote, and it's something I believe in. It is something that's so fundamental about our democracy, and sometimes we get complacent, and that's not right. And then when you get complacent, you get the result. The result. You might not have wanted it in the first place. Every vote counts. I have a riding where there's a lot of turnover. People have difficulty finding the polling location. We're there to help. We're there to guide people, regardless of whether they vote for us. And I think that's our democratic action. It has a little less to do with my party than it does with who I am as a Canadian.
Absolutely, and that's what I guess make everyone feel proud of you being in the riding, and I'm sure they would make their good choice about it. And thank you so much for your time today, Marc. And it was definitely a great time. There was a lot that within this time frame I could learn more about it, and it is definitely inspiring. Thank you so much, and wishing you the best.
Thanks.